How you doing?
I'm good.
Good to see you.
It's good to have you
I
here.
think I'm touched.
Hi, everybody. Help me welcome Marko Ruffolo, and we are going to be talking about something. He'll surprise us with his questions. Marko is a music producer as well as an Orthodox Catholic deacon. Is that right?
That's correct.
And a friend. So I welcome him aboard, and I look forward to whatever he's going to spring on us today. So what's going on in your mind?
Thanks, Kristen. Quite a bit, actually. We, some time ago, we shot a pilot podcast that never made it to the light of day for whatever reason. We will assume that it was because it was meant to be.
Yes, we will.
Over the course of time, it's interesting, like in terms of when you and I met, we were working together on the book, right? And the Sage's Template is definitely something that over the course of time, it's had a profound impact on my life. Because it was definitely a familiar way of looking at things, but at the same time, a very different way of looking at things. Because there's a lot of familiarities in the book. But in essence, you wrote me this really cool foreword. Or maybe it was like, I guess, the author writes a little something on the book signing, right? And it was something akin to having greater freedoms and experiences in my life. And over the course of 2 years of hanging with you, I've learned, it was a paradigm shift. I didn't realize I was allowed to. Let's start with that whole thing, right? Growing up in certain systems, whether it's my Italian family world, which really, part of Italy my family's from is Cosenza, which is very south before you get to Sicily. It's the part of Italy that actually kicks Sicily. It's where the East and the West meet. And I grew up in a very Eastern world. I was raised by my Italian grandparents who immigrated over from Italy after World War II. And my father was a fascist. He grew up in the arms of Benito Mussolini, so that was a very interesting perspective.
Wow, that's right. I forget about that until you say it. And it's like,
yeah, it's a crazy thing, right?
Yeah.
So when I hear fascist being used today in the same way we used narcissist or sociopath and everything else, you'd have to actually try to be indoctrinated into the fascist political system to understand what fascism actually looks like. But nonetheless...
I don't think we want to know that.
But right, no. But it really, in a sense, if you think about it, it begets the problem of how I was conditioned to some extent. I'm not trying to rag on my dad or anything like that. He was influenced by my great-grandfather, his grandfather. And, because of the way things were in World War II Italy, charismatic leaders such as Mussolini, they did certain things to accommodate people, and as a consequence of that, people start believing in what he believed in, which, it's another story for another day, but nonetheless, ultimately, the concept behind fascism is my way or the highway, and so being raised in that, and my friends too, we're 80s kids, right? We didn't realize that we were allowed to think for ourselves. We didn't realize that we were allowed to basically go and live the life that we thought we should live. My parents believed that I should have been a doctor.
All of our parents thought that, for God's sake.
Right, or a lawyer, right? As if that's easy. That's not. And I think my destiny was definitely to be a record producer. But I still have multiple college degrees. I have 2 in business and 1 I was a high school math teacher for a little while, and I've been a high school teacher off and on for different things. Once at Dillard High School for the recording arts, but prior to that in Boca as a math teacher, right? But I did that for my parents. Maybe the teaching degree I kind of did for myself, but the business degrees I definitely did for them. And my education has definitely benefited me, but in reality, I think I did it for them. And maybe in the last 2 years, I started realizing that I was allowed to think for myself, that I was allowed to have my own destiny regardless of what my parents thought of me, whether they agreed or they didn't. And my parents were never impressed with my musical degree, or my musical career, I should say. They were never impressed at how hard I worked, how many hours I put into it, and the success that I climbed. I've had 30 successful peaks in the music business. And I kind of feel like I'm ironically back to where I started. And it makes sense, right? I was joking to Grace earlier, I'm old enough to be her dad, and I'm now working with musicians her age. And that was my favorite time in my musical career, when I was working with people that nobody had heard of. I got to hear them for the first time. And the second leg of my career, of course, I was working with everybody famous, from Ricky Martin to Aerosmith. But in this particular part of my career, it was really cool to start working with bands again. And I've been really fulfilled in that. But nonetheless, I guess to start with, it made me think of something in one of the previous podcasts, which was with Pedro, right? Mm-hmm. Pedro had a similar problem that I had, right? Living in the realms of what his dad thought was an ideal career for him. And we both come from Latin blood. Everybody forgets the Italians were the originators of the Latin world. We invented Latin. But, Pedro was Puerto Rican, correct? Was he from Puerto Rico?
Puerto Rico or Cuban?
Or Cuban.
I think he's Puerto Rican, actually.
Yeah.
Dominican?
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
In the Caribbean, you've got, that's
somewhere
baseball's big down there. Right?
Yeah.
So they're one of those three, DR or...
How did we get that all confused?
Yeah.
I
mean, they're kind of close to each other. It's the Caribbean, Cuba, DR, and Puerto Rico are kind of near each other, but baseball's huge in all three of those islands, Caribbean islands, in the Latino world. So, but he, there was that expectation, right? His parents felt that he should be doing something different than what he did, right? Mm-hmm. And that's crazy, right? But I guess it's really escaping the mindset of being a people pleaser, and it starts with our parents, right?
Oh yeah.
So I guess that's the first thing that I wanted to start with, was to talk a little bit about getting out of the mentality of people pleasing.
That's definitely a limitation to your freedom, isn't it?
Well, you're kidding.
Yeah, I think that probably is something that most people can relate to, and more so than people realize. There are a couple things I hear over and over and over again, and that's one of them. How we get involved in people pleasing. And for some people, it's over the top. Everything they do is about pleasing others. And in some people, it's a little bit more subtle. They want to do good so that others see that they are doing well. And if they're in that space, that's still a need to please others, because you're still wanting to get that feedback from others that's pleasing, that says you're doing good enough, right? So your question actually opens up a ton of doors, but we do take it from childhood. We each grow up in a background. You grew up in the 80s, just prior to that was the 70s coming out of the 60s, which was, peace, love, and communes. Everybody joined together, let's live as one. And it really then took a shift. And, we thought that was freedom. But it was really a rebellious movement away from what was put upon everybody before that, right? And those were all the wars were coming on. Vietnam had happened. The American people were just adamantly opposed and very ugly about the warriors coming home. But you can see in that little bit that what happens is, if we are adamantly opposed to one thing, then we're still locked down by that thing. And I think that's what was happening in that generation, is that it was a rebelliousness and adamant positioning away from the limitations, but everything they were doing was in response to the limitations. And then there's, so you see in that example as well that it's family and from where they came. So if your parents of that generation, your parents came out of the Depression, so you're now breaking free of all of their limitations, but then those limitations, whatever they were, because I don't think they were seen as clearly, set the stage for the 80s. And the 80s then come about, and you're coming from an Italian family with a direct heritage. I also came from, I'm second generation American, and so the influence of the heritage from the old country was right there. And so that is your primary influence, coupled by society and what's going on around you in the culture. So we look at, let's go back now to people-pleasing. Who are you in that, right? I mean, that's what's the most limiting piece of the whole puzzle, is that if we're trying to please someone over there, then we have to look at that person. We have to know what they expect of us. We have to assume what they're going to expect of us so we can get it right before they have to tell us, because if they have to tell us, we've skipped a beat. That's not good. So our entire world is faced in that direction over there, not inward. And when that happens, then we leave ourselves behind. And when we leave ourselves behind, how will you ever find freedom if you're stuck hidden somewhere in the past, right? So we really want to know what starts that. And in each person, that's going to be a little bit different. But it's almost always going to come back to expectations and the need to be good enough. So I'm going to kind of let you say something, but there are a couple things that I know are probably going to come to the surface. Not because I know you, but Because they almost have to
Yeah.
when this is something that you recognize in yourself. So
Sure.
when you hear what I just said, what happens inside?
It's interesting because, thinking about it, right? Like what parent doesn't want to teach their kid excellence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or ultimately from just in general from a motivational point of view, right? But then also think about it: be a good little boy,
Boy.
be a good little girl, right? So we're talking a
Can
little
we
bit about
couple that
behaviors
with
and
bad
morals.
boy, bad girl?
Absolutely,
Because
certainly.
there's your shame.
Right.
There's your fear of not pleasing.
But in a sense, like it seems like there's 100%, right? But yet at the same time, morality deals with, and ethics to some extent deals with right and wrong, right? To some extent, right?
To some extent.
But yet at the same time, who makes the rules to define what's right and wrong?
Bingo.
Right? And that's where things start getting in difficulty because human beings are flawed, they're broken, they're wounded, et cetera, and something might seem like a good idea at the time, right? But in reality, later on, as we evolve, we come to discover maybe that wasn't such a good thing. So, shame-based.
I'm going to challenge that a little bit.
Sure.
Are we flawed, or did we come into this life to have the challenges we have, and do those challenges set the stage for our purpose on this life? So if those challenges, to go back, since you opened with the book, the name of the book, by the way, is The Journey of a Sage. I'll give you a little bit more information of that at the end. But I do talk about this in the book, that, we all come into this life with challenges.
Right.
So are we broken, or are we setting a stage to master or not master, and anything on the in-between, the challenges that are ours? And so we come in, so now then we have this idea of right and wrong. And right and wrong is that dualistic model that we've come into, which is what allows us to then identify challenges as challenges, because if we didn't have that dualistic model, what would challenges be, right? So now we have these fear-based emotions versus the love. We have the right versus the wrong. We have the up versus the down. So right and wrong, is there really anything wrong? Because even if we make a wrong decision, as you said.
And we spoke about it with Evie, right?
Yes.
I mean, a very driven home point. For me, when I was reviewing the content, I was blown, and watching the podcast, I was blown away at that. Like, we've been talking about this for 2 years probably, easy.
Yeah.
And it's maybe it's just seeing it from the outside, seeing you and Evie talk about it, Evie, right?
Mm-hmm.
It hit home for me, right?
Cool.
And I started thinking to myself, and looking back on it, every choice that I made by society's rules of right and wrong still got me where I am today.
Absolutely.
And in
change one of those, and we wouldn't be sitting here right now.
Having a different experience, correct, 100%, and that's bizarre to me, but only in as much as it's bizarre to me to think like in terms of the mathematical equation behind it.
Right.
That variable could be just even an infinitesimal.
Yes.
0.0001 in front of the x, right? It's the coefficient, and it changes.
Correct.
The mathematical formula and changes your destiny, your trajectory, your destiny.
Mm-hmm.
So that in of itself, but I guess just to clarify that we're not talking about semantics here, about right and wrong versus choices that we make, even if society deems them as bad. We're not talking about semantics here, or are we talking about semantics?
No.
So is it a way, then if it's not semantics, are we looking at it from perspective? Is it solely just perspective? In other words, we use the terms good or bad, 4 letters, 3 letters, right, to keep it simple. But in reality, bad has a negative connotation to it.
Totally.
In our hearts.
Yeah.
We hear bad, we think we did something wrong. Goes back to shame-based, maybe?
Totally. Shame and guilt. Absolutely.
So is your approach to change the language, to not use good or bad, what is the language we should say that? How should we think in our
Well, there
hearts?
is no should.
How ought we?
Same word. Oh, I can drive everybody crazy on this end of the camera with the word should, because those are only expectations, and expectations come from everybody out there. They never come from inside here.
Well, my expectations come from you to some extent, because I'm asking you the question, right? What language, what wording? See, I'm using the word should.
Right? So there is no should. The reason I play with words and language is for people to start to feel the difference. If everything we do is right and good, no matter what it is, then where does that leave us with the idea of wrong or bad, right? So the only way we can argue a point is if one of us thinks we're right and the other is wrong. Otherwise, we discuss the point. We dialogue the point.
Hopefully.
The only reason we argue the point is somebody thinks they're right and that the other person is wrong. But if we don't, and that goes back to Socrates, then all of a sudden what we're doing is we're dialoguing the differences of opinion and bringing it down to truth. Right?
Oh, that's a much better way of looking at it, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily perception, it's not necessarily just connotation, it's not just playing word games. We're really looking at what is it inside each of us that needs that flip side. How do we only know we're right because we're not wrong? Do we only know we're good because we're not bad? No. But why does that bad even have to be there? By the way, if you guys are hearing dogs snore, it's part of the gig. Like, hopefully it doesn't take over the talk, but it is part of the gig.
Are they snoring?
I don't hear it. I never hear it. Yeah. I have to get little notes from Grace saying.
On Grace's podcast, I definitely heard some snoring going on there. I thought we were turning this into a contest or something like that.
But we talked about that. We should, yes. We're going to do that. We're going to turn the pug snoring into a contest for all of you out there. Anyway, so the right and the wrong is interesting because we do feel it. And I think that's the most important piece to understand is, as we just brought to everybody's attention, wrong, bad brings up guilt, shame, right? And that feeling of bad. So anytime you say, I feel bad, oh gosh, that was bad, oh, was I bad? Anytime you hear that word, ask yourself if what you're feeling underneath that is guilt or shame, because inevitably it's going to be one or the other. I'm sure we can find an example where maybe it's not, but inevitably it's going to be one or the other. And those two emotions inside are two of the most debilitating in terms of your freedom, to go back to the original point. And I say to people always, my ability to move beyond feeling any guilt and most of my shame, I think there's one small area in my life where I can still feel shame. Other than that, I just don't feel it. That's the most freeing. I can't even begin to put into words, because this language doesn't have them. I can't begin to express how freeing it is to live beyond those emotions. There are several other fear-based emotions that I don't experience any longer either. But for the most part, the ones that made me feel the greatest amount of freedom was moving beyond guilt. And then the movement beyond shame put guilt to shame.
I would agree with you that shame has no value. Guilt doesn't have a value either.
They all have value. Why do they not have value?
How does shame have value? If anything, I feel like it's one of the most counterproductive methods of motivating somebody.
Well, that's true as far as motivating somebody, but it's not. It's when you feel shame. If we say it has no value, what are we saying about you when you're feeling it?
Point. I see what you're saying. So that's technically an emotional side, right?
Very much so. That shame comes about, and here you are talking about pleasing others and your freedom, right? If we're looking at pleasing others and freedom, and then you bring in the idea of shame, right? Shame comes from a place of judgment. But that judgment, when it's a mismatch to what you know your truth is on the inside. I know I'm a good kid. I might have done something wrong, but when my mother says, shame on you, and I'm like, what did I do? I can't figure out what's wrong with me. Like, why do others see me different than I see myself? If I have curly, crazy hair, but I want long hair, and that's what's going to make me feel beautiful, and I'm told, oh, your hair is ugly. How do I figure out that incongruence? That's what creates the shame. I don't know how to feel beautiful if everybody's telling me I'm ugly because my hair is ugly. There's an incongruence, right? And that's a simple example. You can do the same thing with weight. You can do the same thing with, whatever you use it. You get judged on. You may love it about something about it you love, and when somebody else knocks it down, especially as a child, let's go back, I'm really thinking in terms of children here, then all of a sudden you start to see that mismatch, and you don't know how to show the world who you are, and that you are good, and that you are good enough. And so that can lend us to the pleasing side of things, right? Well, let me be good enough by showing them I'm good. I'll show them I'm good. I'll please them. I'll do better. I'll do this. I'll do that. Because I don't want to endure the icky feeling of shame because they don't see me as the good person I am. The child who gives a white lie because he doesn't want to be punished and he's scared of what's going to happen, and then he's called a liar for it. He's like, I'm not a liar. Oh yeah, I guess I just lied, but I'm not a liar. I lied because I don't want to get in trouble for something that I did that really wasn't that bad. Like, it's so confusing, right? But that's, the shame comes out of that mix. And there are other ways that the shame can come as well. But those are the more subtle and important ways for everybody to look at it, because it's really, those are the ones that are powerful, and they get kind of anchored into the threads of our existence in this lifetime. So does shame have value? Oh, hell yeah. Oh my God, yes.
But what about when somebody uses shame against you?
That's ugly.
Right, so in other words, somebody
Like,
feeds
that's just
into,
fucking ugly.
knows that you're ashamed of something, right? Somebody, a close friend, or somebody,
That's
your
cruel.
parents.
That's cruel. Because shame is one of the most icky, vague, deep feelings we can feel. So when someone
Not fun.
intentionally uses something against you like that, it's especially with intention, that's cruel. Because that is one of the deepest pains. One of. It's not the deepest, but it is one of the deepest pains. Because we don't know what to do with it.
So,
right?
No, I mean, really, I don't. Correct.
Right.
I don't know what to do with it.
Right.
When I experience it, I don't, certainly, it's not the best thing in the world to have to feel at the
Yeah.
moment.
Oh, people know shame at so many levels. Sexual assault, any sort of victimization, there can be guilt or shame involved in that. I remember when I was in college, I had an English teacher, and I was out of school he was teaching a poetry class, I think. I was out of school for over a week from a bad back injury at the place I was working in college. And when I got back, I was very, excited to do whatever I needed to do to get my grades back up. I didn't, we were on a quarter system then, and I was in my, I don't know what year I was in, third or fourth year. Anyway, so he said, you're going to be fine, don't worry about your grades. And then he tells me one day after class, I'm a massage therapist, I can give you a massage and make your back better. Well, what do you say to your professor who knows you're trying to get a good grade, knows you've been back? So you know the rest of the story. So he ends up in my apartment to give me a massage. Of course, I wore a bathing suit because I was terrified, but I was terrified, shaking like crazy through the whole thing.
Wow.
Do you think I ever told that story? Not until much later on. The shame that was coupled with that experience made me keep it secret. So as I kept it secret, it just kept destroying on the inside, because that fear that other people would hear it and think, what are you thinking? What kind of a stupid thought was that? What, that icky kind of feeling that I would be judged for something. That's not what I was doing. Ask me what was happening inside, but to judge me in a way that was so different than my experience, I felt helpless. I didn't know how to say no at the time. And I wanted to be pleasing, and I wanted to do what was right so that my grades would reflect the work that I put into this class, because I put a lot of work into the class. But I was left with that big secret for many years, and that's a mild story. But, anybody who goes through something like that carries those secrets, and those secrets are carried out of the shame. And when they're carried and when they're kept secret, that shame is allowed to fester on the inside. So shame carries a tremendous amount of value. And as we start to look at it, the healing that comes out of it is pretty amazing. And to be able to more comfortably share, I just told that story, but even to comfortably share that story without any worry about how the other person is going to respond is the most freeing experience you'll ever have.
Really is.
One of the most. I would say it's the most.
It definitely is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So your shame, it locks you up. It takes a lot of your freedom away. And when you're looking at freedom and pleasing people, and you've got that hidden platform of shame, you can see how those two play each other out.
100%. It's interesting. So what about in terms of discussing shame, right? So I guess in a way it has a value in some regards, but at the same time can easily be weaponized against you.
Totally. As can any of your deeper emotions.
Fear.
Any of your fear-based emotions, correct. Well, nobody really demonizes the love-based emotions, but
that's kind of hard to, well,
right?
Maybe it's kind of hard to, I shouldn't assume that, right? You never know. Certainly people play on your love, don't they? If
they use your love because your heart opens, you open. It's not necessarily just your heart, but you open. And as you open in love, that gives them the opportunity. Now, some of that is done consciously, some of that is not done consciously. And so when it's in a relationship, and I don't want to get sidebarred on this. I think we should do a podcast straight on this. But in abusive relationships, that mix between love and destruction is such a critical part of the pattern, right? And so you bring that up. And so in love comes the destruction. And then the love brings us out of the destruction. And then there's the destruction. And it's like, you're just kind of back and forth there. And so the protagonist ends up wanting to please and make everything better and make everything right again. And so they're constantly understanding and pleasing and doing to make the relationship good again. And as the relationship gets good again, then all of a sudden the antagonist destroys it and the protagonist has to lift it back up again. Right? So again, in love, yes, because sometimes in love we open ourselves. And in that vulnerability, if you will, we're a better target.
Okay, so this is a big part of one of the diagrams, right? We know the diagram that resounds is love versus fear based on where it lives within the body in your diagram in the book. Uh-huh. And although the journey of the sage, I'll refer to it as the sage's journey, because I'm the sage on the journey, I'm assuming, correct? Right?
Yes.
I mean, so as me, the sage, journeys, you find yourself at times opening up your heart to people, and based on, I'll speak for myself.
Yes.
Based on my choice, I usually give everybody the benefit of the doubt, and I usually turn a blind eye to people's faults based on a belief system I grew up in, and everything else.
Not good.
Maybe, let's explore that a second. Knowing full well the risk could be that my heart could get broken.
A lot more, too.
Yes, but we'll start
because you're not staying true, right? It's important when we are in a relationship and we see flaws, red flags, whatever we may see in the other person. That's okay. If our gut tells us, ooh, that's okay. It's okay. Everybody has challenges. So we discern based upon that. But when we go from discernment and observing and watching, which really is from healing, that we get to that point. Before we get to that point, what we do with that is what you just said, is that we turn a blind eye. We put it aside. We ignore it in some way. We make excuses for it, or we understand it away until it becomes an excuse, which is another story another day. But as we do that, we're not allowing ourselves, in our experience, to accept that other person for who they are. We're denying an aspect of who they are and in the way they're playing out their life, right? But if we can feel it, see it, and discern it, okay, it's there. I accept you with that flaw. Now we're not going to understand it to a point that we make excuses for it, with it. Not for it, with it. It's different. So in the healing of our own self, this isn't going to come from what we do. This comes from the healing within ourselves. And so as we get more and more and more comfortable in ourselves, and I'm going to kind of cover a couple things here. When we go to the healing within ourselves, we get to a place where we are so attuned to our inner experience that as we observe others, we see clearly, more clearly. And we continue to see more clearly as we heal inside ourselves more and more. And from that point of reference, we get to a point where we need no more defense. We are open. And other people's behaviors and words and whatevers are theirs. And for the most part, they're going to pass right through or not even get over to us and whatever. There are going to still be those challenges where you feel something, and those are places where you can heal. But as you heal through all of this, you get into a place on your journey of a sage where you are so centered within yourself that someone else's behaviors, thoughts, actions, words belong to them, not you. You don't take things personally, which is why it's one of Don Miguel Ruiz's 4 agreements, because when you get to that point, you don't take things personally. You observe. And the integrity in your word then comes from the simplicity of knowing your experience at that time. So we aren't turning a blind eye to ourselves, and so consequently we're not turning a blind eye to someone else. We accept that. That's a much different level of acceptance than what we're used to. But it is, again, going back to the right or wrong, everybody is okay and right with who they are and where they are right now in this lifetime. And I must accept everybody for who they are and where they are in order for freedom to ensue. Right? Ultimately. Now we're talking ultimately here, because before we get to that place of really of being able to accept at that level, there is that tug of war inside, as you're describing so beautifully.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
There's the feeling of the vulnerability, there's the feeling of your heart getting broken, there's the feeling of what they can do to me if I'm not on guard, I have to put up those defenses, and you can see all of that is limitation out of fear of what can happen if I don't. And as you move beyond whatever those fears are, and you move beyond those challenges with loss and rejection and not good enough, and you sit more comfortably within yourself, that fear of loss disappears, the attachment disappears, and in that freedom you start to see more clearly.
Okay. So let me then play the gadfly here for a moment. Okay. I'll use 3 hot terms, and then maybe we'll even discuss the more clinical side of things, right? So you have the narcissist, you have the sociopath, right? And you have the psychopath, or you have people with anti-personality disorders.
The anti-personality disorder is the sociopath, psychopath. So we have the narcissist and the antisocial so far. That's the clinical side. Anyway.
Clinical side of things, right? I might not be aware that I'm in a relationship with somebody who has antisocial personality disorder, or somebody who is a narcissist, because I'm not educated. I only know that they're making my life hell.
That's all you need to know.
That's it.
The only reason we have labels are very limiting. The only reason we have labels is so that clinically, if I want to give a referral and I want to talk for 10 minutes about their characteristics, I can say, bleh, and that captures a set of characteristics. But other than that, I personally don't think labels should ever be used, if I could put an expectation out there.
You've mentioned that before, and probably on the podcasts. If I remember correctly,
Probably, because I say it all the time. I don't like labels.
I'm pretty sure but it might have been with Grace. But yes, you were definitely not a labeler. That's for sure.
Nope.
So let's just, I brought them up simply because they're the hotbed, obviously.
Yes,
that's why
absolutely.
They're the hotbed of discussion, and obviously people now use, like I said earlier, fascist, narcissist, sociopath. This is somehow their subject matter experts on it. You know the schooling you had to go to with respect to diagnoses and everything else. It's not that simple, right? But nonetheless, we're talking about being in a relationship with somebody who I've accepted years ago, seeing the red flags, and then all of a sudden in the last few years of the relationship, things are starting to get really ugly, and I'm ill-equipped to handle it, right?
Not really.
Well, okay.
Yes, you are.
I believe that
yes, you are.
Yes,
I think you do believe that.
But that's it. So I come to you as you are you are my life, my guide through my own journey, right? I come to you, and we're talking about freedom. We're talking about living in my own truth, right? Mm-hmm. And here I am now in a difficult situation in a particular relationship. Your advice with respect to living my truth versus their truth is based on the template.
When you stand in your own truth, it matters not how ugly or how disfigured emotionally the person across from you is. That's their challenge. It's something that is important to what they're experiencing in this lifetime. Whatever that is, that's important to them. It's important for you to be so attuned, to get to know yourself so well that you follow that internal experience inside you. For instance, sitting and talking to you right now, I can feel that my voice comes from way down in my diaphragm. If at any point in our conversation I could start feeling it come from up here in my throat and start to get a little bit tight, and I would know that I left that soulful connection behind.
Okay, why did you do that?
Something has me concerned, fearful, uncomfortable.
So it's a pedagogy. Like in vocal pedagogy, you have to learn in singing. We teach our artists in the studio to learn better vocal pedagogy. So they have to know their body to know how to produce the sound properly.
Correct.
Same
Absolutely.
Concept.
In fact, in my office when I'm working with individuals, I have them do an exercise, which we all learn in our singing lessons, that when you sing, you want to hit a note up here. So it comes from your diaphragm, up the back of your throat, over the roof of your mouth, and to this point here. So you have to open up, I can't do it anymore because I haven't been singing in a long time, and hit that note, right? Same when you're speaking. If you can come from, and keep focusing on it, feel it, right? And everybody gets all nervous and embarrassed when they do it, but It's just a sound, right? Can you
Right, it's a
pull
sound.
it? Can you pull it from down here and work on it until you can really feel that vibration? You'll feel the vibration, right? You know that. The same is true when you're speaking. You're aware of the body. And that's your first step. Your breathing brings you into awareness. Knowing your voice and the vibration of it brings you into your awareness. That's the physical awareness of your body. But the spiritual awareness and the emotional awareness, when you can put all three of those together, you're standing inside the experience that you're currently having at all times. Viewing the world from the inside on that little perch, looking out, right? What hunters stand on that platform? What is it called? The deer platforms?
The blind, right?
Is that what it's
blind,
called?
I think it's called, yeah.
So they stand there, and they have their back against a tree. It's my imagination. I clearly do not hunt, nor could I. And they see the forest and the woods and the animals in their habitat, and they get to observe, right?
Yes.
Well, let's just forget the hunting end of that.
My friend Steve in Montana actually just went on a hunting trip with his nephew.
Yeah.
Everything said he was
We don't have to talk
describing
about
the
the outcome. I love the outcome in terms of me coming home, but I don't like the outcome. So anyway, when you look at that and you can see the world, you see it through a very, very different set of eyes, right? You're observing, you're standing back, you're seeing how the animals move and roam and take care of one another. We're seeing a lot of really, really beautiful videos on social media right now of how animals help one another, how they allow other species, including humans, to come in and help when they're desperate,
Yes.
and how that happens. But when we are the observer, we get to see that, right? And we take a completely different understanding of everything. When we're in the thick of it, we miss so much. And so when you're in a relationship and you've got these red flags and you say, okay, I feel that, and you just keep your eyes wide open, you get to learn how it works for that other person. What are they about? What are they feeling? What's going on inside, right? Why do they do this? And then you just keep watching. And at some point you know where the experience that you're having with them is not a match to your integrity and to you. And because you live your life on the inside, you start to redefine the relationship. You don't necessarily have to sever it, but you want to redefine the relationship. Now, what does it mean to me? Now, you may have been my partner, and I realize that, no, you're not my partner. You may have been a friend that I watched all my Gator games with and did everything with and never skipped a beat. Now I want to back up a little bit. Okay. Don't want to sever it, but I just want to back up and redefine it a little bit because, kind of give it some space, right? How do I want to interact? And then there will be some of those relationships where it's time to just say goodbye, right? It's time to say goodbye, move on. A snake sheds its skin multiple times in a lifetime. We don't know how many. 2, 20? You never know. Neither does she, by the way. But you're going to shed your skin. And that is going to be representative of how you transform throughout this life, in your relationships and in your lifestyle. So, yes, I think that the labels aren't important. Not having the clinical understanding, God forbid, thank God we don't. And let's not even try to. I don't want you looking outward and trying to, you have all these personality inventories. If you can figure out that other person and what personality they are, then you'll know how to talk to them.
Right.
Holy cow. If you're doing that, every single human being you sit with, you're trying to figure their ass out before you talk. I'd be a mess.
Yeah,
I'd be a mess.
yeah.
It is insane.
Yes.
But if I only have to know me, and I only have to know what my experience is, and I live in a life where I am always compassionately curious about who you are, oh my God, the door's open. And guess what? I don't care what your personality is. I can absolutely appreciate you for all that you are. And if you've got some sociopathic tendencies, that's okay. I'll watch the manipulation because you know what? I'm sitting over here. And I'll see it. And I'll watch some of that manipulative stuff. And I'll probably watch it unfold. And you know what? I might be taken a couple times. Who cares? Because I don't care. That's theirs, not mine. If I let it go too far, it's because I left me behind and jumped on their train. That's when we're taken off the cliff's edge. Yeah. We will not jump off a cliff's edge by our own free will. It's only when we're taken or pushed. Wow. So allow yourself to really step back and think about you first. Not in a selfish way, in an experiential way. Because this life is yours. And in order to really know complete freedom, we stand on the inside and we look out. In order to not be so focused on the other person and pleasing the other person, we stand on the inside and look out. And that need to please, the enjoyment you get out of taking care of others and watching them feel joyful when you do please them, that's part of your truth. You don't have to do that. Just by being true to who you are, you will emanate that kind of caring and gift-giving and being of who you are. But when we have to try to please, we're doing it, we kind of bastardize that truth of ours because we forget. I don't have to act it out. That is who I am. I can't tell you how many nights people are over here and I'm making dinner for more than one person. And I live alone. I love that.
Yeah.
Do I do that to please them? No. In fact, some nights the meals suck, and that's like just what you got to deal with, right? It just is what happens. But I do it because it's fun. I enjoy their company. It's something it's about my enjoyment. If I didn't want to do it, I wouldn't do it. I literally wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
It's not why I do it. But if I did it because I thought I had to please them, oh my God, my nights would be miserable.
Yep.
Right?
100%.
So that's a silly little example, but that puts it together. So if you're good, I want to wrap everything you're saying up because you're in a really good place here. You came to the table talking about freedom and pleasing others. We then brought in shame, and then we brought in relationships where how do we know what's going on and not let our hearts get broken, so to speak. We know that there's going to be cruelty. We know there's going to be manipulation. We know there are going to be people out there whose challenges in this life make them a little bit more antagonistic to our enjoyment than we would like. The more we become aware of our own self, in all of those, the shame starts to disappear, the guilt disappears, the need to please others disappears, and where we stand on the inside is an awareness of our experience and what we wish to experience with that person across from us. And where it sways away from that experience, well, we don't follow. So we don't have to set boundaries because we just don't let it happen. If you're going there and I don't want to go, I say, yeah, I'm not going there. Right? We're not harsh about it. Like, enjoy yourself, catch you later. And people know that you're being just genuinely truthful with where you stand. No judgment at all. And open curiosity about what's happening in the world and theirs. That leaves you in a state of not needing defenses, not thinking you have to please others, moving away from the shame that comes from taking in the judgment of others, right? All of that starts to heal. But the only way you're going to learn to live in the experience that's inside you is to be willing to move beyond your own challenges and to know the experiences that you wish to have, right?
Right.
So with that, I really wish all of you a life of greater and greater freedom and greater love. And may it start from within yourselves. I want to thank you so much for joining us.
Did you want to mention the book?
Oh, yeah, I'll mention the book. Let me mention the book. So I wrote a book, The Journey of a Sage. And in it, I introduce you to the template, the Sage's template, which is the tool that I use to teach everything I talk about in my podcasts. So the link to the book will be below. It is available in paperback, so please enjoy it. It is not your typical self-help book. It's a slow read. It's got a lot of depth to it. So the people who have read it say they have to have a notebook next to it to write down notes and go through it. So sorry, of course, as you can see, nothing is too shallow on this end of the deal. So I want to thank you. Thank you for joining me. And please click on the like button and subscribe. And please make sure that you enjoy the book if you're a reader. And until next time, may the magic be yours. Thank you so much for joining me. And please visit KristenBomas.com, where you can easily access all of my social circles.